Hello, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar that is sponsored by TrainingPros. The topic of our webinar is the flipped classroom. It's a pretty exciting topic for me because it's new for me. Currently you are muted. We have hundreds have enrolled into this webinar, so we needed to keep everyone muted so it wouldn't be too loud or too much talking. However, there is a question feature on your view, and I'm showing you this on the participant controls right now, so that you can send us questions. There will be several of us in the background monitoring the questions and providing them to our facilitator during the program. We'll do our best to keep up with them as they come through. If asked a question, you could also raise your hand, but we will not be calling on anyone. But if we ask a yes or no question, or have you ever, you could raise your hand as an answer. So next, I would like to do a quick poll to give everybody a chance to weigh in on, let's see. So which of the following do you incorporate into your current instructional strategy? You can check all that you want. More than one answer is great. And after we get a good percentage of you that have voted, we will take a look. See what the answers are. Good, lots of people voting. Okay, a few more seconds. Okay, so let's take a look at our answers. So what we see is that almost everybody uses instructor-led training as part of their strategy. 84% use e-learning, 62% use some kind of simulation. We have some mobile learning, wow, 24%, that's really fantastic and cutting edge, and 37% are using social learning. So I'd like to just introduce those of us in the program today. This is me. I'm Leigh Anne Lankford. I'm with TrainingPros. TrainingPros specializes in working with training and development departments of organizations to identify, attract, and onboard contract professionals for specific and specialized training needs. So we work to staff instructional designers and trainers and technical writers with companies for very specific needs. I work with TrainingPros as a relationship manager and an instructional designer. And if you're a contract professional and are interested in being considered for our talent pool, please feel free to go to training-pros.com and click on Join Our Team to be considered to join our great talent pool. Also, if you would like to discuss this webinar on Twitter, we have a hashtag of FlipClass. You guys can use that back channel. Next, I'd like to introduce you to the designer and the facilitator of this webinar. Sarah Gilbert is a very talented consultant that works with TrainingPros clients. She has been a speaker for the e-learning guild. She's been a speaker for ASTD many times, and she has been featured on the Adobe website. She's the owner of meLearning Solutions. meLearning Solutions provides learning solutions tailored to fit the needs of businesses and educators. From consultation to design and development, meLearning will work with you to find the best learning solution for the project and bring your ideas to life. So at this time, I'm going to pass the baton to Sarah. Okay. Okay, Sarah, you now have the presentation.
Thank you so much, Leigh Anne. I really appreciate that introduction, and a huge thank you to TrainingPros as well for sponsoring this session. As Leigh Anne mentioned, we're going to be using the hashtag FlipClass if you'd like to use Twitter as we go through the content. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Mel's Gilbert. You can also mention me during the broadcast if you'd like. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about flipping classrooms. And the reason why I'm excited is because I think, based on the poll even, that many of you guys are going to be surprised to see that if you're already taking that blended design approach to your training programs, you're going to very quickly see the benefits of applying this flipped classroom model in your training programs today. And we're going to talk about, during this webinar, what is different about a flipped classroom model. I know that for me, I have been applying blended training concepts for years in my curriculum, and I think that there are a lot of similarities, and we're going to talk about why. But we're going to talk also about what's a little bit different. What do we need to focus on most for the flipped classroom model? So to get started, have you ever tried to help your kids with homework? And I know that this is definitely an image that I can relate to with my kids. I have 3 boys. But even as when I was younger in school, I can remember my mom asking her to help me with my homework, and she was always clueless. And she's an IT professional, so she's a very smart woman. And I would come to her with trigonometry, geometry. It's typically math type stuff. And she would say, well, I don't remember doing it this way in school, or I don't remember how we use that process. And it's difficult for us when we're working with our kids to work with this homework, because we don't know really how our teachers are going through this content with the kids at school. And so, you know, it can be frustrating, and we're wondering, well, shouldn't the teacher be helping the kids with this homework instead of sending it home for us to try to figure out how to help our kids? So it can definitely be frustrating. But I know that most of us on the call are in the workplace, and we're working primarily with workplace learning. So how does that apply to us? Well, this might look familiar. Perhaps you've done some classroom training in your organization, and you're in there for an hour or maybe 2 hours or maybe even a week-long training, and you get back to your desk to apply what you've learned. But when you get back to start using this new program or new process, there isn't anybody around to help anymore. So now what are you going to do? You're sending emails trying to get someone to help you. The vendor's already gone, you know, so you can't ask the vendor, or they don't know how it applies to you. It's probably not in the frequently asked questions that they've sent out. And so it can be really frustrating, because you're going into a session, a classroom session, to learn the content. Someone talks to you about it, and then you go back to apply it, and you aren't really sure what to do whenever you run into a problem. So what if you could use your class time to do this? What if your learners, your participants, the folks that you work with, were able to have access to that content, have access to that new information or that new process, and were being held accountable for going in and taking a look at that before they went into class? And not only were they just reading over some content, but they were actually asking, you know, jotting down some questions, having some time to reflect on what they've just learned, so that way when they come into the classroom, they're able to sit with you and have you walk through content with them and answer questions and go through real practical activities where they're actually applying what they've learned with the help of an instructor or a vendor. What if we could use that process in our workplace learning? And so that's where we come to the question, well, I'm already using a blended approach, and I'm already incorporating a lot of activities into my training. So what's the difference? What can this flipped model do for me that I'm not already doing today? Well, one, we know that blended learning combines the face-to-face classroom with computer activities. So it's typically, we have some instructor-led content that's in a classroom or even on a webinar. And then you have some activities, maybe some e-learning. Many of you said you were using mobile learning, which I'm surprised it was, I believe, over 30% were using mobile learning. Maybe you're doing podcasts. It could be games. It could be any number of things. But The difference with flipped learning is that although flipped classrooms, this flipped model is a type of blended learning, and it does incorporate blended concepts, the difference is this. For flipped teaching, although it's a form of blended learning, you're leveraging technology to focus on application. So in blended learning, our whole focus, back when we started, the blended learning concept, we had all these new great technologies. So we were doing our podcasts, we were doing our e-learning, we're doing all this really new cool stuff. But what we didn't really maybe look at as much is, where does the application piece fit best? Because what we typically do is we look at, okay, well, I have some instruction and I want to incorporate a game because I don't want to bore people to death, or maybe I can use some of this content and have it as a prerequisite to this course. So we can take pieces out that fit in these different technologies very well. And that's awesome. But there's a little bit more to it with flipped teaching, because what this does is it helps us to focus on what can we do to help people apply what they're learning with the instructor. So rather than our application on our own, what pieces fit best when I'm in that application process, when I'm applying what I've learned? What fits best with an instructor? When do I really need help? When do I need someone to come and answer questions for me? And many of you, if you have heard in the education field, K through 12 maybe, there is a big buzz around differentiated instruction. So there's this differentiated learning. How can we teach one thing lots of different ways? And project-based learning. So how can I go through and teach this concept through the use of a project? So all of these things are related. But today we're going to talk about how can we best focus on the application piece. So let's talk about a case study, because I'm a big fan of numbers and being able to validate what I'm learning and why I should implement a new process. There is a great blog that I came across in some of this research. It's the Knowledge Star blog, and David Grebo is the one that writes this blog. Some of you guys are probably familiar with this. eLearning Guild, I know, puts out a lot of information every week for blogs, and there's some information. Always they're quoting stuff from the Knowledge Star blog. So it's a good blog for a source of information, and there's a case study there on Clintondale High School, and it's in Michigan. This principal here, his name is Greg Green, and what they did a study on a 9th grade class, and originally they had a really high failure rate, and they were trying to see how can we turn that around. And so what they did is they used screen capture software called Camtasia. I think a lot of you guys are probably familiar with Camtasia. I use it very often. And what they did is they recorded their lectures in Camtasia into small, and not long 1-hour lectures, but small bite-sized lectures in Camtasia. And they posted these lectures to a variety of outlets. So they had their school website, they had YouTube. And what would happen is they flipped their homework. So basically what they did is the homework was listening to the lecture, and then when they came into class, they actually did their homework in class. When they had a facilitator, they had a teacher there to help them with that content. And the statistics on this and how they were able to improve and drop that failure rate, when they implemented it the first year, their failure rate dropped 33% in 1 year. Now, I know for me that was a tremendous impact. That's a third of students that were previously failing that they were able to bring into a passing score. And specifically in English, it went from 52% failure rate to 19%. Math went from 44 to 13%. So these are some huge statistics, and you can't really argue with those types of numbers to see how much better those students were able to learn when they could do their homework in class, when they had a teacher to help them with it. Now, when we talk about flipped teaching, we're talking about having the best place time for our instructor time with the students. And so for those of you who are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, the base of Bloom's taxonomy starts with knowledge, and then you go into comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And I'm actually going to flip over quickly to a handout. And this handout you're going to be able to get after the session. But I just wanted to show you this briefly, because what this shows, and I'll try to zoom this in for you. In Bloom's taxonomy, you see that this basis of knowledge and comprehension, what we're suggesting here is that we focus on how we can bring the knowledge to the learner and let them be able to access that at their own pace. And we have a poll question that's coming up in just a moment. So I'm actually going to flip back over to the presentation, and we're going to come back to this. But we're going to go on to the next poll question. And Leigh Anne, if you want to go ahead and pop that up for the participants. So here this question is, have you ever had an effective, positive learning experience that was self-driven? And so I've got some examples here of an online course or YouTube. I'm a huge fan of YouTube. I've used it even as of yesterday to be able to go in and set up a pop filter on my microphone. So it's a fantastic tool to be able to learn at your own pace. You've got recorded lecture. Basically, it's lecture information that you can pause or rewind. You can revisit it. Whereas if you were in a class, unless you have a handheld recorder or some type of recording device, you're not able to revisit that. So let's take a look and see what types of experiences you guys have had with your self-driven learning. Okay, so it looks like the majority of you guys, I believe that's 92%. I have a tiny screen to see what you're seeing, but it looks like the majority of the participants on this webinar have had a positive learning experience that was self-driven. So I think that this is a really good visual for us to see that we are able to learn on our own. We don't necessarily always have to have someone standing right with us to teach us something, but we do need access to that content. We do know that there are individuals that have information that we need access to. So let's talk a little bit about the design of a flipped classroom model. So we can break the flipped classroom into 4 pieces, and I want to give credit here to a blog. It was another great blog that I found some really good information, and for those of you guys who are into brain-based research, Jackie Gerstein has some great models on her user-generated education blog. She has models that are broken out into all different types of concepts, but it's still this flipped classroom model. And we'll have that link for you in the resources document that you'll get after this webinar. But you'll see here that it's broken into 4 pieces. So you have demonstration and application, experiential engagement, meaning making, and concept exploration. So what do we have in each of these segments? Well, the first one that we'll talk about is the one that we typically start with when we're designing content, and that's the educator suggested content. So you have your video lectures, audio lectures, content-rich websites, and online chats. So you'll notice here that instead of suggesting that we bring folks into a classroom to be able to go over content, we're suggesting that you deliver this content, you deliver this information through video or audio. Or possibly you can just have this on a website that's accessible somewhere on a website, but where we say content rich, it's not just a bunch of information to read necessarily, depending on how in-depth the concept is. And then you have online chats. So this is your webinars, your chat rooms, you could have a Google Hangout, that type of thing. So this is where we're originally delivering the content. Then we have meaning making, and this is learner generated. So what we're suggesting here is that once you have your content, once you have your information, so you've listened to your lecture and you have a basic understanding of what the concept is, now we're going to reflect on that. So we're asking our learners to go and maybe write a blog about it, Maybe they do a podcast or a vodcast, and what that is maybe we have them record a short YouTube video, or maybe we have them record a podcast. It might be some testing, and we're not suggesting necessarily final exams, but maybe checkpoints, quizzes, that type of thing, where we're kind of checking in to see, are they grasping that concept? And then your social networking and discussion boards. So when you're a facilitator and you check out what your participants are doing in this learner-generated piece, and we go out and look at their blogs and we listen to their videos and or their podcasts and watch their videos, we can get a really good idea and tap in to see where they really are in grasping the concepts. Experiential engagement is more hands-on with your educators. So these may be assignments that are very specific. So your hands-on activities, and they're typically in class or as a group. And you could have games and simulations, experiments, that type of thing. These are really great activities that you as the facilitator are designing and working through these with your participants. And finally, with the demonstration and application, this is the piece where we're looking at more of a final evaluation from our learners. So it could be this creative and personalized projects and presentations. It might be a paper that they've written, or a final project that they've done, or a presentation that they do for the class or for you, some way that they can demonstrate that they have been able to grasp this concept and now can apply it. And so when we talk about earlier, when we had the person, the man that was mad at his computer, and he's gone into this classroom training, he's upset because he can't apply it. Well, this might be that he's actually going through that process.
Hi, Sarah. This is Leigh Anne.
So I think that now, yes, I was going to say it's a good point to take questions.
Okay, well, we're getting some questions now. One of our participants, Deborah, pointed out that they have trouble getting their students to do the work in advance of the classroom, which means that they all come in with a different level of understanding. But then she pointed out that she thinks the meaning-making portion that you went over might be part of the answer, but since she asked, I thought there would probably be other people thinking the same thing. Would you like to?
Absolutely. Yes, I would love to. So absolutely, that is 100% the case, because what I found is when I took this approach, because when I was doing blended learning, I was already doing pieces of this flipped classroom without realizing that it was really cool or a thing yet. And so what I typically did is I would have this pre-work, right? So you would give them the content ahead of time, and we would say, read that, or you're going to be in trouble. And then they come to the class, and they're not all on the same page. And what I found was, for me, we incorporated a discussion board where, as a facilitator, I would post questions on the discussion board, and that way everybody could participate on their own because it was asynchronous. They didn't have to all be on at the same time. They could go out and post as they finished their content, and they could answer those questions. And as the facilitator, I could address those questions and be able to help us all get on that same baseline before class started. So the meaning making is absolutely a critical piece for this model to work. And it helps you as the facilitator to be able to review that information and help everyone stay on the same page. Because alone, there's no way for that participant to know if where they are is correct or not, because you do have to ask questions. Even when we're in a classroom setting, we want to raise our hand and ask a question at some point during the training. So that meaning-making section is what allows your participants to be able to do that.
Okay, 2 more questions. We have somebody else asking about the class size limitations, because it seems that with this model you might be limited to smaller class sizes.
You absolutely will. And this is a big piece of what you have to look at when you're evaluating this for your own organization. Now, I've done a lot of work in call centers. And in the call centers, you could have anywhere between, I would have anywhere from 500 to a couple of thousand call center representatives that I would have to train, let's say, on a new process. It's not reasonable to say that I could have 10 people in a class. So that's why you really want to look at technology to see how can we address this in other ways. Because if you can help them get the majority of the concept without bringing them in a classroom at all, then class size starts to become not as relevant. So taking a look at that, I know that I don't have this as a poll question, but many of you may have actually taken your college courses online at this point. I know that my master's degree was completely online. I never had a facilitated session during my entire college, my graduate career. So my entire master's, my MBA, I did online with no facilitator lecture at all. So everything that I did started out with the content-rich websites. I had a lot of research that I had to do. I had a ton of meaning making. So in that section, everything was about discussion boards and blogging, everything. And through working with others and the facilitator actually participating in that meaning-making sessions, I was able to do almost everything in those two pieces. So when it came to experiential engagement, when I had to go through and do a hands-on activity, or the demonstration and application, which might be a final paper, I was able to go through the entire process without ever being in a classroom. And so when we think about, let's say, software training, because I've done a ton of technical training, we think about a classroom. Okay, so if I think I'm going to tell them about it, so they're going to have the pre-work that it's a lecture, and then I'm going to have them do some reflective work, and then I'm going to have people come into a classroom and have them do hands-on activities in a classroom, then we panic because we know, okay, my classroom only holds 10 or 20 people, and typically at least 7 or 8 of your computers don't work in the classroom for your technical training. And so as a facilitator, it can be really frustrating to say, okay, well, I'm only going to be able to work hands-on with about 10 people and be able to give them a really good experience. That's why we want to look at ways that we can actually move some of those things that we're doing in the classroom into these other sections, into these other pieces, to help the learner take more responsibility for their own learning. And I know that we say that, I know there's accountability and not everyone does that, but that's part of what this starts to help you think about.
Okay, we have even more questions still coming in. So an overwhelming question we've gotten is, are we going to send these slides to people?
Yes, we can if you would like. I would leave that up to Leigh Anne if we want to do that. I'm fine with that. We do have a recap of the actual slides will be in that handout. So you'll have this model in the handout, and also some of the questions that are coming up and the answers, the Q&A, we're going to plug into that handout as well.
Yes, and then we have James, who is already teaching over distance education. He's been looking at flipped classrooms for a while, and he wants to know how we suggest he uses the facilitator session, and he's on with his students right now in real time.
Awesome. No, that's awesome. So how he uses the facilitator session, does he mean the concept exploration?
I don't know. Maybe he has a facilitator session that's assigned. James, you can feel free to throw it. He said yes.
Okay. So if you're using distance learning, I mean, there's so much more to it than that, because we would have to look at your content and your audience, because we need to, I'm just to make sure that I want to be very clear, this is still based on very solid instructional design. So we still start with what's our audience, what is our content, what's the best way to be able to deliver this content to our audience. There are a lot of things we have to look at before that. But for distance learning, I absolutely love, my favorite is video lectures. I think that Khan Academy has done an excellent job of using this model and using the video lectures to be very successful. I think that things like lynda.com, where you have the video and that walks you through it, YouTube, again, I've already mentioned. So video is absolutely my favorite. I think that there are opportunities for audio as well. I've listened to podcasts before that walk you through how to use just basic things online, like certain Google apps and that kind of thing. And those have been very useful for me as well. It completely depends on what your content is and what your audience needs are. I'm not sure if that answered the question, so feel free to ask a follow-up question.
Great. They're just still coming in. So young professionals, overworked, not enough time, they use class time as their escape for learning. Do you have any comments about that?
Yes, I think that if we're using class time as our escape for learning, let's use that to have more hands-on activities. So I think that for me, when I go into a classroom, I want to be able to engage with the facilitator. There's nothing that I can stand worse than having a teacher tell me, hold your questions until the end, or let me finish talking about what I'm talking about and keep dumping this in your head until it's starting to fall out the sides. Let's see how we can use our classroom time to be able to engage with our students more. And I've done this with classrooms before where I usually had, it was early 20s. Well, it was actually across the board, but I would say the majority of the folks in call center training are, young adults. And in that age group, they want to be in there together. They want to be able to socialize. Why not have that time working on projects together instead of listening to me talk, right? As the facilitator, why not take that time to let me interact with them and help them through projects? And granted, I mean, if we're doing that type of thing and we're pulling them into the classroom, we do have to look at class size, and we have to look at how we can best fit the needs of those students. But I think you'll find if you've done a really good job with your concept exploration and your meaning making, then the piece where you pull them into the classroom, they can almost teach each other at that point. And then you can float the room to make sure that everybody's still on the same page, have activities and checkpoints for that.
Okay, so we've got a lot more. We've got some questions about different audience types, but one unique question is, I think you may have touched on it with your case study, the success rate of knowledge transfer or gain. Do you see it increasing, maintaining, or decreasing with the flipped model?
I think not only in the statistics that I've seen in research, some of the ones that I talked about earlier in that one particular case study, but in my own personal experience, my undergrad was at a state university in Tennessee. I went to school in Nashville, and that experience for my undergrad as opposed to my online experience for my graduate degree was like night and day. It is a totally different retention. It was for me personally, and also for the research that we've done. And I can actually point you to the chat or to the handout that we're going to give you after. It does have a link to that case study and the statistics for that particular class and case study.
And that link is in the chat.
Right.
Okay, so we have a question about how do you get call center trainees to engage in asynchronous reflection before coming to live classroom sessions?
They hold each other accountable, and I love that question because I've seen it happen, and I can't even tell you how many classes I did using this model in a call center. And what they do is when they're participating in a discussion board and they see each other answering questions or asking questions, they'll answer each other, and you want to encourage that. But it goes back to why is social networking popular? Why do people like to use Facebook? Why do people like to use Twitter? They like to use it because they like to interact with each other, and this gives them a way to be able to informally talk about what they're learning in a safe environment. And I always like to make it fun in my classroom training. I wouldn't make this some formal, you're going to be tested on whatever you post in this discussion board. It needs to be something that's fun and interactive and engaging for them. So you post questions out there, and then people would post jokes and it would be funny, type of interaction. It should be a fun environment for them to participate. But what I found is that typically they hold each other accountable for what they post in the group, and they learn so much more from each other.
Great. So applications of this style for soft skills, performance-based, or sales training?
I think that it is the same across the board. I love this model for sales. I think that, again, we have to look at your audience. So some of the things that I've used this for, I know I've talked a lot about technical training, call center type training. Of course, there were soft skills, all complete, tons of soft skills training in our call center curriculum.
Hello, folks. I don't know what happened. I'm sure that this has happened to all of you at different points, but I'm glad you came back. So we have about half the folks are already back in attendance, and I believe Sarah has come back. Sarah, are you ready for me to give you the presentation?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
And Leigh Anne, would you like me to wait a minute to let folks sign back on?
Let's go ahead and finish answering questions, and they're coming back on quickly. I've already got 57 of the folks are back in, 58 it's going up. So because we've had some great questions, and I would like us to continue answering them and then move on to our case study.
Tell me where we dropped off.
Well, we were you were in the middle of answering questions about soft skills. I think you had just finished that up, really, about all the different applications for soft skills.
I did have one other thing, one other way that I've applied this. I've applied this in competency-based training. We had a new set of competencies that came out for an organization where I used to work, and this new competency model, it was something that we had to train the entire organization. So it wasn't something that we could easily bring people into a classroom. But we did this, we applied this concept by giving them content ahead of time, giving them e-learning, to help them get the original, the beginning content. Then we had some meaning making through a discussion board and some FAQ interaction. And then our educator suggested we had some games and simulations that they did in, it was some flash-based games that they were able to complete. And, we had a big thing around it, but it worked really well for the competency skills as well. And so I think that this is a really great model that you can apply to anything. Conceptually, I know that it's very high level, but I think if you see where things in your content best fit these areas, it's essentially just create it, pilot that curriculum, pilot that course, see how it works out, see what other ways that you're able to make adjustments, and continue to revisit that. I think all of us, we're all professionals. We all know a lot of this stuff already. And so it's easy for us to look at it and say, okay, well, this makes sense, this will be difficult here, but then it's always more difficult for us to apply it to our own content because I think we're so close to that material. So, it's really good to maybe bounce it off of people, but always continue to evaluate that content to see where you can make changes.
We have a question about using games instead of demos for the technical application.
For the technical application in the experiential engagement? Or for which part?
She's not specifying. It just says on the technical application. I'm assuming experiential engagement.
Okay. And read me the question one more time, Leigh Anne.
What are advantages of games as opposed to actually have demos on the technical application?
Well, I think the games are probably one of the best ways that we can engage people when it comes to experiential learning. And, I've heard gamification and all the buzzwords spin around. When done the right way, gaming can be extremely effective. And I'll use an example. I know that this is going back to K through 12, but it still applies in the workplace. When my son comes home and he's working on his spelling words, they have a website called Spelling City, and when they go onto that website, they can actually go in and take a look at their spelling words. They can have the site test them on the words. They can use them in sentences and those types of activities. But they also have games where they can play hangman and that kind of stuff with those spelling words. And I have seen a tremendous improvement just with my son working on his spelling words. And it works for all of us. I've seen it in the workplace where you have some kind of frame of reference when you do that gaming piece. And it makes it fun, so it makes it something you want to remember. I think that sometimes we get out of a classroom session, we want to dump everything out and, go take a nap or something and get all that out. But when you use games, it's something that it has that positive experience, and it makes you want to remember the content more. And I found that to be my experience as well, probably some of you as well.
Okay, I have a comment that we can see this is a great model for high schools and colleges, but in private organizations this could be challenging for employees to do the coursework with competing priorities and labor laws. How would this differ from traditional learning where students come to the classroom with differing levels of understanding?
Well, that is a very loaded question because this could be a potential culture shift for many organizations. Now, if you're an organization that is already tracking if you're already using e-learning and you are already using mobile learning even, or you've implemented some games and you have a discussion board, I don't know if many of you know, but most LMSs have discussion boards built in now. But when we're looking at this, if you haven't crossed those hurdles yet, then this is a tremendous shift for you. Now, if you're already incorporating blended learning models into your training curriculum, that's not a hurdle necessarily, or as big a hurdle anymore. So when you look at this type of thing, this has to be something that you get buy-in. It's not something that's an easy shift to make, because we're used to training being, I have someone tell me how to do it, and then maybe I do a test or some kind of exercise, and then I go back and I'm supposed to know how to do it. And so it is a huge shift from what we're used to. So what my suggestion would be is, if you have that hurdle that you're running into where you have to sell this to your upper management and you have to get your buy-in and hold people accountable and that kind of cultural change, then you want to go out and look at some of these case studies, get the numbers that support why this is important and why do I need to do this, and how, look at return on investment. Why is it important that we make this shift? Now, just by pulling lectures out of it, you're going to save money. You're going to save money because you're not paying someone to sit and listen and then have to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it through other activities or verbally or whatever the case might be. You're going to see better retention, and I would use some of those case study numbers to be able to prove that case so that you can start that culture shift in your organization. So in no way, anytime we talk about a new concept or a new model, it's never going to be something that we all just say, oh yeah, let's just undo it. It's something that's going to be a change for all of us. So you want to look at it for your organization and see, is this something that makes sense based on these numbers? Is this something that I want to take back and implement? So it's a very fair question, and it's something that I think all of us have either faced or are going to face at some point in our careers.
So Sarah, we could keep going with these questions, and maybe we could finish them up after the case study, but maybe we should go on and do the exercise before we run out of time.
Absolutely. And the reason this case study is important is because it is based in organizational, it's workplace learning. So in our example, this example is based off of a study group for a professional certification, and some of you who are familiar with ASTD are probably familiar with CPLP, and I think Deb Thomas is on this call as well today. But this study group, we applied a blended approach when we developed the content and we developed the curriculum for this. And what it consisted of, we had 2 live sessions, so face-to-face sessions, and 9 webinars with a facilitator. And the facilitator had about 2 hours of lecture, either in the webinar or in person. And then there were maybe a couple of 10 to 15-minute activities. So it was chunked out. You had the facilitator go through some of the content. We would break out for an activity to kind of reinforce what we were learning and then go back to the lecture again. So it was a typical design. And then we had homework that we would do between sessions. So it would consist of reading the material for the next session. There would be some case study questions that we would have to go through and answer. And we also had a LinkedIn group that we used. We used the discussion board to be able to carry on that conversation, and through some questions out there, the facilitator would participate as well. And we used Twitter for the informal discussion. We had a hashtag that we used for the sessions, and we were able to follow that, post that discussion out for everyone to go and see what everybody else was getting out of those different sessions. And then, of course, we used SurveyMonkey for some evaluation and testing type things. So we can see here that this was definitely a blended approach. But the question that we're going to ask now to the participants we have on the line is, what could we have done to flip this classroom? So I'm going to go to this slide. And I'm going to put these models side by side. So on the left side, you've got the model that we used for this study session. For this curriculum, we had 11 instructor-led sessions, either in the a webinar or a classroom. We had our homework for reading the chapter and case studies. We had the LinkedIn group discussion board for Q&A with the facilitator as well. And it was asynchronous, so whenever you wanted to get on and post answers to those questions and post your own questions. And then we had Twitter. So what we're going to do now is Leigh Anne has the chat open for you guys to see what types of things could we have done differently to be able to take this blended approach a step further and apply this flipped classroom model. And I'll give you guys a few moments because I know it's going to take a minute to let that sink in and put some things out in chat, and Leigh Anne will give us some recap as we get some of the feedback in.
Yeah. Great, we're starting to get some answers. This is your time to put on your designer hat. The question about what topic is being taught, this is the CPLP certification for learning professionals.
So think of any professional organization that offers a certification that gives you fancy letters at the end of your name. That's the type of study group that it was. We were studying for a certification, and it was a 150 question quiz that you have to pass for the initial piece of the certification. That was what we were studying for in this group.
So let me know if you want me to start telling the answers out that we're getting, or if we want to wait a few more minutes.
Whenever you get ready.
So we've got suggestions to record the instructor-led training for people to watch on their own time. Mm-hmm. We've got, let's see, instructor-led sessions could be doing the homework and discuss case studies. Instructor-led sessions homework and discuss the case studies in the classroom time. Post recorded webinars before the actual classroom. Let's see, we've got a lot of videotaping the classroom part and making it homework. Asking the students to design and submit games to reinforce the concepts. I love that. Let's see. Blog posts that have case studies. We have comments about moving stuff into more mobile platforms for homework. Make the homework activities into the classroom. They are the classroom. Twitter feed. They all have a class project and a demonstration in class. Or a demonstration, they didn't say in class. Have them review the learning system on their own and come together to quiz each other. Discussion boards, homework, and Twitter.
I love these responses that are coming in. So I'm writing frantically because I have some things that I want to talk about that are these are really great suggestions, and I want to tell you what the result is of doing some of these things.
An online community for discussion where the facilitator posts questions. The classroom should be activities and discussions. Set up problems experienced by CPLPs and working sessions with peers in the class to develop solutions.
Very good.
Content curation projects based on Twitter feeds. Divide the classroom into teams via social media platforms to do a compare and contrast. Ban the word and the concept of pre-work. It's all learning. I like that one.
So true.
I have a question about, is the corporate Blackboard a good tool for facilitating the flipped approach? Not that the suggestions are slowing down. So go ahead and start discussing, and I'll jump in if we get a new one. Sarah?
Okay, well, let's go in and we'll talk about some about Blackboard. Is that it really does matter about the tools. If it's a good but you know, And we know that when we come home in the evening, we probably want to relax and don't, not think about work. Well, these individuals committed 2 hours of their time every 2 weeks to be on these webinars. How much more convenient would it have been from just a sheer scheduling aspect of it to be able to let these participants go in and listen to these recorded webinars whenever they were ready, to be able to go out and access that content by these experienced CPLP facilitators whenever they had the time to do it, instead of trying to coordinate schedules for 50 different people to be on a webinar for 2 hours at night. I think we chose Tuesdays or Thursdays, I can't recall now. But just from a scheduling aspect, that takes that nightmare away from you to be able to let them access that content on demand. So that would have been a huge win for designing this program. And then we talked about the making well into there as too, but to have the students be able to create the games not only does it take, are they really grasping that content, Leigh Anne, are we still online?
Yes, we're still online, but I'm having audio problems. David, can you take over as a moderator in case I'm not able to talk?
Oh, I can hear you. I can hear you now, Leigh Anne.
Okay, I keep coming in and out.
Yeah, I got you now. I believe that David's on mute, so that might be the reason he can't jump in. There he goes.
Here I am. Okay.
Hey, David.
Other questions? There's a couple questions that are similar about putting the burden on folks to learn outside of the classroom. One says, what if nobody completes these exercises? The other one says, they already, how do we ensure that they do all this learning on their own?
Right, and I think that is probably our biggest fear. And I would throw this question out to you guys. What if they come in the classroom and they don't decide to learn? Because I absolutely agree with you. If I'm in the workplace and I have my job and you're paying me to do a job, but now you're asking me to come, to training next week to be prepared to learn all this content outside of class. One, it has to be something that's supported by upper management. It has to be something that we're allowing them the time to do. So we have to be able to sell this to our upper management, to our folks that are the decision makers. Because if they don't build that time in for the students or for the, the folks that are in your organization, then it's going to be really difficult for them. I know that me personally, I'm not going to do it on my own time, so you have to pay me to do it, right? You have to give me the time to do it so that I'm not overwhelmed and working overtime to finish this. So we do have to be able to sell this, the benefits of this, at a higher level. Once you have buy-in there and you can hold folks accountable, there's a big piece with the accountability and making sure that we hold that accountability. But the second piece is that I would suggest trying it on a small pilot group. And I think what you'll find is that the engagement that they have from this format, folks enjoy it so much more that they want to learn this way. And so you'll find that they want to go and listen at their own pace. And if you're designing the information or you're designing the content in a way that is engaging and is small enough to where I don't want to sit and listen for an hour. Maybe if it's 5 minutes long and you've broken out little chunks of content, then I can do that at my own pace and I don't feel overwhelmed as a participant. So you do have to design it with your audience in mind. So these are great observations, and those are definitely things that we have to think about. The model is something that you want to apply, I think, on a smaller level and pilot it, see how it works out with your particular audience, and what types of feedback you get, what types of things that they think you should do differently. And if it is a problem with something where they don't feel they have the time to do it and they don't feel they have the support of management, that's a much bigger issue. And so it could very potentially be something that you would have to overcome in your organization, or obviously this model wouldn't work. I mean, it has to be something that is supported.
Okay, so we have another question, but I want to do a time check. You just have about a minute left. I didn't know whether you wanted to have any content to finish up, or.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go ahead and take one more question, and then I'm going to be giving you guys my contact information, and I would love for you to reach out to me with questions after this webinar. I'll be giving you my email address and that kind of thing as well.
Okay, so here's one that's interesting. What are the key skills you would say are required I guess for a designer to be able to develop flip models over and above pure instructional design?
I think that you need to know instructional design to be able to apply any kind of model. I think that when we were learning instructional design and we were looking at all the different models, the older models, this is the same type of, there are the same types of considerations for this model as any model when we talk about instructional design, and we still start at the same things. So I think that if you're designing any type of content or any kind of learning, you need to have a good, there's tons of content online available for you to be able to learn some of those basic design concepts. But I think that it applies across the board. And I wouldn't say that there's any one, magic key that will help you be able to design for this type of format. But I do think that, having that instructional design experience and, educating yourself with information that's out there and available is a great idea for anybody that's going to be designing any kind of curriculum. Okay, so I think we are going to field the additional questions for later, and here is our contact information. You have my website there, which will give you a contact form to get in touch with me, and I'll also be putting my contact information as well as Leigh Anne's on our handout that you'll be receiving, I believe, by the end of the day today, which will have the resource information, it will have the copy of the model, and some additional content for you. And I don't know if we have anything else. I can't see the chat, but Leigh Anne?
No, that was fantastic, Sarah. On behalf of Training Pros, I want to thank you for putting together this great informative webinar, and I know I'm much more educated on the flipped classroom, and I think that the rest of the group has demonstrated that they found it valuable as well, since almost everybody came back. So then thank you guys for your patience.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to contacting any of you that want to reach out to me and can carry on this conversation outside of the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.